Hello, and thank you for coming today to my talk on Arcology as self-actualized volition. I go ahead and just like to get right into it here. Today, I'd like to expand beyond Schopenhauer in a way that does not dismiss the realism of his analysis. We may take the imagination used towards its limit to conceive iteratively of the probable nature of life beyond us. That is to say, we can imagine what life may become in principle. The epistemological basis of any given paradigm of knowing has undergone historical evolution in terms of prior thought given to the subject. The historical evolution of epistemology is then tantamount to understanding any given paradigmatic construction. Very early came Plato with his dialogues on what would be later known as justified true belief via the Gettier problem. Plato was followed on by Descartes' skepticism, which ultimately asserted that the process of thinking and reflection itself is sufficient to prove ontological being. Science emerged as a systematic methodology for acquiring knowledge about the world. The scientific method attempts to allow testing of falsifiable hypotheses. Figures like Galileo and Newton contributed important scientific groundwork defining a mechanistic accounting of the observable world. Philosophers such as Kant sought to reconcile rationalism and empiricism, arguing that understanding is shaped by both sensory experiences as well as innate categories of thought. This synthesis paved the way for romantic and existential movements in the 19th century, where figures like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche emphasized individual experience, subjectivity, and the interpretation of existence. Moving to Schopenhauer, we posit the will as the fundamental driving force behind human behavior, as well as suffering. Schopenhauer believed that while intellect and reason guide us, they are often at odds with our deeper instinctual desires. This insight leads to reflections on art, aesthetics, and the potential for transcendence through compassion, which add layers to the understanding of human experience beyond rational analysis. One significant limitation of defining any given epistemology stems from the nature of perception and cognition. Our senses, while powerful, can be deceptive. Interpretations of experiences are shaped by individual biases, cultural contexts, cognitive frameworks, and subconscious content. This subjectivity raises questions about the objectivity of knowledge. Put simply, two observers might perceive the same event differently due to their backgrounds or emotional states, leading to varied interpretations of reality. While mathematics and logic provide robust tools for reasoning, they also inhabit a realm of idealization that may not fully capture the complexities of the physical world. Kierkegaard's incompleteness theorems challenge the completeness of any mathematical system, suggesting that there are truths which cannot be proven within that system. The scientific method itself, while effective, relies on hypothesis testing and empirical verification. This process is constrained by the current state of technology and methodologies. What we can observe or measure at any given time informs our understanding, and as such, scientific knowledge is always provisional. Philosophically, thinkers like Kant found limits to knowledge in the distinction between phenomenon and noumena, the things as they appear to us versus the things in themselves. This distinction emphasizes that our knowledge is shaped by human cognition, which may never fully grasp the essence of reality. Schopenhauer, too, contributed to this discussion by asserting that much of human experience is driven by irrational will, with aestheticism forming a partial solution, but still bounded by the nature of life, reproduction, and death. As I mentioned in opening, we may take the imagination, used towards its limit, to conceive iteratively of the probable nature of life beyond us. That is to say, we can imagine what life may become in principle, and also what it may already be out there in the far reaches of deep space. We may take the scientific method in the body of provisional but well-researched knowledge about the world as a tool set to reify our imaginations. This is perhaps restating the nature of architecture, but not from concrete buildings and literal groundwork, but by epistemic premises. Instead of unfulfilled desires, we take a long-term engagement modifying existential pursuits to actually realize shared understanding. One of Schopenhauer's most provocative claims is that aesthetic experience provides a kind of cognitive access to the will's veiled reality. Art, especially music, has the power to suspend the ordinary instrumental relation between subject and world. The melody of a song, the masterful use of rhythm and intonation, may reveal to our cognitive apparatus the reality of something in itself. I assert that we may eventually surround ourselves with this kind of self-evident art. Arcologies, human habitats the likes of which are scarcely comprehensible today, would be the means by which we achieve this. Beyond modern, arcologies could be transcendent. With a self-aware organizing capacity behind will, a community of enlightened individuals could approach any goal for any duration. Such a community could actually see itself as individuated yet immortal, beyond the historical cycle of growth and extinction, the synthesis of self-actualization and pragmatism. The complexity of biological existence, the failure modes of cells such as cancer, acute pain, and physical discomfort, these things might still exist. But they could be surrounded always by shared understanding, by beauty, by the coherent organization of a reasonable social mentation. Problems not intrinsic to the mechanistic function of systems too complex to reason about or manage could be open for reduction or transformation over time. The detection, observation, and solution finding of problems could be a shared project of social growth, out in the open, amenable to any scrutiny. Safety could eventually be taken as a given, as all problems over time are solved in parallel and iteratively, indefinitely. Self-containment, perhaps the most futuristic component of arcological design at the present moment, would be among the first of these shared problems to fully contend with. These problems needn't be seen as burdens. Rather, they are the foundation of a rational and pragmatic volition for will to satisfy itself indefinitely with. Intellectual, existential suffering is not the inevitable outcome of practice. Satisfaction and suffering are malleable and themselves subject to revision. Both interoperate with the level of self-awareness of a being, as well as the nature of their evolutionary and their architectural environments. If there is a fault with arcological methodology, it is self-evidently a fault of volition. If a given population cannot find it within themselves to do what is clearly right, to become the kinds of people they don't themselves find loathsome, they must first make the effort and then sustain that effort. Enlightenment does not begin nor end because of a temple. A kind of enlightenment must be achieved to even conceive of a temple in the first place. We are beckoned by reason to lift ourselves towards the highest point of mutual understanding, inner understanding, environmental understanding. From the vantage point of self-actualized will comes the capacity for arcological proliferation itself. In prior works, I've precisely defined the technical boundaries of arcology for the sake of a calculation and hard analysis. In reality, arcology is not prescriptive of any particular social ethos or even biological construction. It is an extraordinarily open-ended concept and cannot be truly analyzed with a mind closed off to the manifold possibilities inherent to the range of conscious biological life and principle. I'll conclude my epistemic review by perhaps stating the obvious. We have the computational power now, as well as the multimedia capacity to make digital twins and new city simulations. However much a bricolage our architectural and simulative synthesis may be at first, will, guided by self-actualized pragmatism, can move us closer to arcology. We must observe the unfortunate situation of rather constrained and meaningless applications of volition in the form of arbitrary and irrational activity as it does surround us. It is not philosophy's job to actually repair the soul of humanity, but to understand it. Of course, it would be difficult to repair so much as a water main without first understanding its mechanical principles. Expanding into architectural theory, Soleri's original miniaturization, complexity, duration hypothesis of arcology described an aesthetogenesis of being, a spiritualization of form, and a temporal compression of the complexity of forms through time. It could be interpreted, as was done in Soleri's book, The Omega Seed, an eschatological hypothesis, that this ongoing time-binding process will ultimately culminate in an exteriorization of the true form of ultimate intelligence throughout the universe as all matter condenses and becomes spirit. Let's consider some of the implications of acknowledging cognitive loading, imperfection of knowledge known as ignorance mobilization, on any given optimal semi-autonomous urban system. Dunbar's number, proposed by Robin Dunbar, suggests that because of the nature of human brains, our optimal self-organizing population size is about 150. Technology can obviously extend the capacity of civilizations to feed and house people via trade, labor arbitrage, and other methods. But what scale is optimal for human empowerment? Private and public spaces share their domain with natural, organic, private, and public spaces. To coexist within an arcological framework requires planning for human and ecological spaces. Logically, human empowerment may only occur when our private and public spaces are shared with naturally occurring private and public spaces. Otherwise, any success we may achieve is inevitably limited by the time it takes to draw down a critical amount of life from the biosphere. As conscious beings, this drawdown also inevitably impacts our spiritual lives, as we are aware of the biological inequity inherent to it, as well as the existential risk it entails. To date, prototype arcologies have not achieved their biospheric goals. A minuscule portion of urban human communities are providing greater than 80% of their total dietary requirements locally to their city assemblage. Even fewer are providing 100%. Generally speaking, the larger the urban system, the less likely it is to be producing food requirements locally without food miles. Of course, human population size is an important and valid consideration. In order to construct a sane, scientifically valid new type of urbanism, while also addressing real population densities, our prototypes must exchange people and stuff. The internet is one obvious saving grace for this technical problem. Although autonomous communities might exist as semi-permeable bubbles of around 150, shared social networks might extend into arbitrary numbers of people. Who would take seriously a rocket scientist who proposed to make a spaceship to house 4 million people with current-day technology? Yet to build a spaceship for 5 people with no internet connection to Earth would be dull. Decentralization of cities into human-scale arcologies might appear from space to be like individual cells dividing themselves up into thousands of smaller cells. This is a new way of envisioning city as organism. Such cell-dividing decentralization has an aesthetic of intelligent growth and new organismal emergence. Beginning at this smaller size of 150 may not have the visual excitement of the extremely large arcologies featured in the book City in the Image of Man. However, in many of my studies thus far, the physical size of a true arcology would indeed be quite large if it were to house even 150 people. And I would like to note, this sizing can be approached from various degrees of long-termism. If one, as a designer, wants the Arcology's biosphere to last 10, 100, or 1,000 years in principle, and naturally, larger biospheric sizing grants either greater population or increased ecological margin, but not both at the same time. In either case, the resource calculus demonstrates enormous assemblages to be approached vertically and indeed in 4 dimensions, including time. Concrete mixed-use pathways might flow throughout the local microcity structures. Human-scale pathways might connect to the surrounding conserved land base by much longer concrete bicycle highways. Pedestrian highways could be used to reach other sectors of the urban hub, as well as connect over dozens of miles to other microcities. In such a way, locally, Dunbar's number-tolerant, ecologically balanced urban communities could enjoy human-powered travel over vast scenic vistas. To quote Solari, "Two worlds apart, biosphere and homosphere, are contained within one single process, the living process. Architecture refers to the homosphere. As the organic is not architectural, so architecture cannot ever be organic. The brain sees to that. It filters that which impacts our senses into that which is essentially intellectually Homo sapiens. The integrated city module, considered as organism, is necessarily non-organic because it is the work of the discriminatory brain. It is post- or hyper-organism webbed with human intelligence." In closing, Arcology is technically possible, and prototyping Arcology should proceed as a matter of existential risk mitigation. Arcology is self-evidently valuable to human becoming, and I assert that Arcology is the natural goal of self-actualized volition. We can build it together if we care to. Thank you very much.